Hey guys, it's Istebrak. Today I wanted to make a quick video on my sculpting process. So I've been taking sculpting lately, and I have to say it's been so transformative to my process, and it's allowed me to see geometries and forms so much more clear than I usually see them. Sorry, that's my cat jingling in the background. But really the best thing about sculpting is you're replacing anything that was ever line dependent on form, on volume. So you think volume, you think sculpture first, you think of all the real protrusions and altitudes that you would never have seen unless you rotated the image. So, as you know, in two-dimensional drawing, you're missing a third dimension, and when you miss a third dimension, you have to invent the third dimension. You only have the two, and then you create a projected false third dimension that allows you to behave as if the world is three-dimensional. Really, it's a flat paper. The opposite applies when you're sculpting. And what you see here is me rotating constantly because I need to analyze how the volume speaks as a cross section, which means that from the side view, does this volume project too much? So you're always rotating. So you take that practice back to when you sketch by hand. So you're going to think, all right, is this the kind of volume I want? If I were to see this from the side, would I apply this much volume? Would I apply this much of an altitude? So that's what sculpting invites you to do. It trains you to think like a sculptor. So always what I say is paint as if you are missing a dimension. Paint like a sculptor who's run out of clay and all he has is a pen and paper. Shh, sorry. When you sculpt, when you take a break from drawing and come back later on after a great deal of sculpting, you draw differently. I say that there are always two things that change the way I draw forever. Sculpting is going to be one of them. The one before that is form studies, and they all apply the pull from the same thing, always teaching our brain to rotate, teaching our brain to see things it would never have seen without the guidance of three-dimensional rotation. So getting a cube, getting some sculpty or sculpey, whatever it's called, and just sculpting away off a cube and seeing how that object transforms and seeing how it behaves under the light source. Your ability to rotate an object means that you're going to be able to rotate the geometry with your lines. So if all you're doing is sketching in lines and you feel like your lines are just too flat, everything is too two-dimensional, and you want some volume back, take a moment just to do some fine art basics, which is like sculpting and form studies, and you come back to your two-dimensional lines and you bring in that volume you were missing, even if you still wanted to preserve that style. So as you can see, it's sculpting, like process-wise, is really similar to drawing and rendering. You start with the large objects, the large depressions, and you create those similar to with your large brush. You create depressions for the sockets in the nose, and you throw some light on the nose. So you work large to small, and you work zoomed out to zoomed in. Exactly the same principle as when you are when you're drawing, and right now what I'm doing is I'm creating little depressions for the eyeballs, which I bring in later using a mask layer, and or another layer that's masked. I'm not sure exactly because I'm very new to ZBrush, and you really don't have to know every single aspect of ZBrush or all the major little tricks and stuff. All you need to know are the basics, and then you just start sculpting. It's very forgiving. It's just like Photoshop, but three-dimensional. You have a warp tool, you have a transform tool, you have a move tool, you have a lot in your control. And what I'm using is that pinch tool, the damn standard tool. Yes, that's what it's called. And what I do is I pinch little pieces so it looks like it's actual lids. And of course, you wouldn't be able to throw in a lid if you didn't know where the socket was, and you wouldn't be able to throw the eyelids in if you didn't know where the main eyeball is going to be. So you always have to think back to the geometries. So at one point or another, you're just going to have to give in and start doing form studies because it will make this a lot easier for you, sculpting, and then it makes rendering faces a lot easier. So I was going for this like snobby, highbrow kind of lady. And at first I tried to sculpt in the ball of the eye, but then I just completely nixed that. It failed. There's this whole topology thing that you have to keep in mind when you're sculpting, which is a pain in the butt. But as long as you're following the basic graph, which is the mesh, the longitude and latitude lines I call them, then your sculpt is going to be successful. You won't have any major distortions or issues like that. You also work exactly the same as Photoshop when it comes to resolution. They just call it poly count or subdivisions. You just raise the subdivisions and you keep working more and more detail. But again, just like in drawing, you decrease the subdivisions until you have a good size, and then you go back to large subdivisions. So you choose all the basic structures when your poly count is low, and that invites you to always think about the low poly version. I don't know if any of you own Portrait Studio, but we have low poly heads and busts that allow you to see the major planes. And so when you're working early on in a sculpture and you want to succeed in this sculpture, you're going to have to work with a low poly count, capturing all the basic planes and the positions of the eyes in comparison to the cheekbones. Make sure that it reads anatomically. Make sure that it reads as a human. Sometimes, if you've gone into Photoshop, to ZBrush for the first time, you do tend to create weird humanoids. You tend to like make these aliens the first time around. So to counter that, I had a little bit of fun. My first sculpt, this is probably my third one. My first sculpture ever on ZBrush was an ogre. So I knew that I had no pressure to perform anything that was human, completely human and proportionate. I didn't want to go in there yet. I didn't want to try the beautiful yet. That was all boring to me. I went straight in for an ogre. I will be attaching all of these Z tools, which is the exact files I used, to Patreon for the reward this month, as well as some other Photoshop brushes. Right now you can turn off, as you can see, I turned off symmetry and turned on, I'm no longer working symmetrically. So I made the nose a little crooked, I made the eyebrows asymmetrical. So if you guys are turned off by that constantly symmetrical look in ZBrush, you don't have to be limited to it. And that's me just sorting my files. You always have to save and make sure, because Maya is very demanding. ZBrush, sorry, is very demanding of your project. That's the first ogre I made. Very, very scary looking guy. No, that's the first one. The one before it was the second one. I was just taking some snapshots. But you really have to think about how important it is for you to, want to paint something that has volume. So if you want volume in your work, you want to go to that direction, you want all of that to affect your work. You want to start painting realistically, you want to start seeing the light source, you want to start really, really creating more realistic characters, more believable characters from a world. You want to start exploring age, exploring the non-beautiful, non-perfect, non-Barbie doll face. All of that is very difficult to explore just with a pen and paper. You have to be able to look into the anatomy and think about how this anatomy behaves as a sculpture, as a three-dimensional geometry in light. And there's no better way to do that other than form studies, or the expansion of form studies, which is sculpting. So a lot of my students from private practice, I invite them to buy some Sculpey or something like that, and just start creating the face, or if they have issues rotating the eyeball or painting an eye in 3/4 view, I ask them to just get some Sculpey and sculpt an eye. And that's one way to really improve your rotation, your geometry, thinking about the planes, thinking about the presence of light source, how their light rotates along with the sculpture, and how light might be fixed. So I looked up a reference actually for the ears, because I've never sculpted an ear before in my entire life before this moment. So it was very tricky figuring out all the ins and outs, and how the ear functions, and how it organizes sound. Had a little bit of a distortion problem, as you can see here. Really, really messy stuff if you paint outside the poly or the mesh or something like that. Just a little problem. No matter how much you fix on one side, see that crazy distortion. So I had to completely crop out that part of the ear. And other than those issues, I think that's the only problem I had with ZBrush. Those were the only turn-offs. Other than that, I think it's an amazing tool to explore your ability to sculpt, find where your weaknesses are. So if you feel like, oh, I'm not ready to sculpt yet, don't say that, because it definitely will help you find your weaknesses, help you find your weak points, and you'll be able to explore how to fix them. You'll be able to find it. Maybe you won't even notice yourself healing because it's something that you've never done before. So you'll suddenly go back to two-dimensional, and you'll stop doing that weird habit you did before. I gave her a little bit of a scowl, or that stink eye kind of thing going on with her nose and her eyes and her squint. I think I made one of the eyes squint just a little bit more. I just wanted to make her look like a snob or a queen. I called it queen. this file. But all in all, I think that you all should try ZBrush at one point or another. And if you can't download it, if you can't buy it, just get some Sculpey or some clay or plasticine and sculpt away. It is a bit messier and a little bit more tricky to use. But it provides you with the same purpose. Just make sure that you have the light source top down at all times. That's typically the studio lighting that we use for designing characters of all kinds, so that you should be going for that as soon as possible if you want that realism in your work. So that's it for today. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll try to do some more of these sculptures, and of course you guys have freed up my time a lot, so I'll be able to do experiment a lot more. And this is just one example of the benefit of your patronage. Thank you everyone for watching this video, and thank you for your support. I appreciate it. Bye bye.